The thing about Halloween parties is that everyone wears masks, but somehow the real faces always show through anyway. Standing in Richard Kirby's living room, watching my wife Catherine laugh at something Jonathan Drake whispered in her ear, I realized I'd been the only one actually hiding behind a costume all these years. "Greg, you look like someone stole your treasure," Richard said, appearing beside me with 2 beers. He was dressed as a pirate captain, complete with an elaborate hat that kept sliding over his eyes. "Get it? Because you're dressed as a pirate too?" I accepted the beer and took a long drink. "Your jokes haven't improved since college, Rick. Neither has your taste in women, apparently." He nodded toward Catherine, who was now standing close enough to Jonathan that a business card couldn't fit between them. "She's been circling him all night like he's the last piece of chocolate at a weight loss meeting." Catherine looked stunning, as always. Her black dress hugged every curve, and her auburn hair cascaded over bare shoulders in waves that probably took an hour to perfect. At 35, she could still stop conversations when she entered a room. Tonight, unfortunately, she seemed interested in stopping only one conversation in particular. "They have history," I said, watching Jonathan's hand hover near the small of her back. "High school sweethearts before she met me. Ancient history should stay buried, don't you think?" Jonathan Drake looked like he'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. Broad shoulders, perfect jawline, the kind of confident smile that suggested life had always bent to his will. He worked construction, drove a motorcycle, and had never met a rule he couldn't break or a woman he couldn't charm. Everything I wasn't, in other words. Catherine seems to disagree. The words came out more bitter than I intended. The party swirled around us with the usual suburban energy. Neighbors I'd known for 8 years mingled in costumes that ranged from creative to ridiculous. The Hendersons had come as matching salt and pepper shakers. Tom Bradley was inexplicably dressed as a banana. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that my marriage was apparently dissolving in real time 20 feet away. "You know what your problem is, Greg?" Richard adjusted his pirate hat and fixed me with a look that meant he was about to dispense wisdom, whether I wanted it or not. "You're too nice. Catherine's used to getting everything she wants, and you just keep giving it to her. Marriage is about compromise. Compromise is 50-50. What you do is more like 90-10, and you're not the 90. I wanted to argue, but watching Catherine throw her head back and laugh at another of Jonathan's comments made the words stick in my throat. She never laughed like that with me anymore. When had that stopped? When had our conversations become limited to schedules and household logistics? "Remember when she insisted on the house in Maple Ridge?" Richard continued. "You wanted the place on Oak Street. Better neighborhood, better schools, half the mortgage payment. Catherine liked the kitchen in the Maple Ridge house. Catherine liked the idea of impressing her father with the address. There's a difference. Frederick Vanderholt had made his opinion of me clear from the beginning. I was acceptable husband material for his daughter, but hardly optimal. A restaurant district manager with a state school education and working-class roots didn't quite measure up to his standards. The fact that I made decent money and treated Catherine well seemed secondary to my lack of pedigree. "Speaking of Frederick," Richard said, "isn't he supposed to be here tonight?" "Running late. Some client emergency at the law firm." "Convenient. He probably sensed drama in the air. Rich people have radar for that kind of thing." Across the room, Catherine placed her hand on Jonathan's arm while making some point that required intense eye contact. The gesture lasted 3 seconds longer than necessary, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I need another beer," I announced. "Greg, maybe you should—" "I need another beer, Rick." The kitchen was mercifully empty except for Linda Fletcher, who was refilling a bowl of chips. Linda worked as an attorney at a small firm downtown, handling divorces and family law. She'd been Richard's neighbor for 5 years and had become a friend to both our families. "Enjoying the party?" she asked, looking up from her task. "It's certainly educational." Linda followed my gaze toward the living room, where Catherine and Jonathan were now sitting on the couch, their conversation apparently too important to conduct standing up. "Ah," she said quietly. "I see." "You see what?" "The look of a man who's starting to understand something he'd rather not understand." I opened the refrigerator and grabbed another beer, taking my time with the bottle opener. Catherine and Jonathan dated in high school. Ancient history. Ancient history has a way of feeling current when the right people are in the same room. "You think I'm overreacting?" Linda considered this while studying my face. "I think you're a good man who deserves better than wondering whether his wife wishes she'd made different choices 15 years ago. That's a diplomatic way of saying I'm an idiot for marrying her." "That's not what I said at all. But Greg, if you're asking my professional opinion, you might want to consider protecting yourself." "Protecting myself how?" "Remember that prenuptial agreement you signed? You might want to review the infidelity clauses." The suggestion hit me like ice water. "You think Catherine would actually—" "I think Catherine is a woman who's used to having options, and right now she's exploring one of them pretty openly." Through the kitchen doorway, I watched my wife lean closer to Jonathan, her hand resting on his knee. They looked like they were discussing something intensely personal, something that required whispered confidences and meaningful glances. "The prenup was Frederick's idea," I said. "Catherine barely read it before signing. Smart fathers protect their daughters' assets. Smart husbands protect themselves too." A burst of laughter from the living room drew our attention. Catherine had moved even closer to Jonathan, close enough that her shoulder pressed against his arm. The intimacy of their posture was unmistakable. "How long has this been going on?" Linda asked gently. "I don't know. Maybe nothing's going on. Maybe I'm just being paranoid." "Greg, I've handled enough divorce cases to recognize the signs. The way she's looking at him, the way she's positioning herself, the way she's completely forgotten you exist. This isn't innocent nostalgia. So, what am I supposed to do? March over there and demand she stop talking to him?" "You're supposed to stop pretending everything's fine when it obviously isn't." Before I could respond, Frederick Vanderholt's voice boomed from the front hallway. "Sorry I'm late, everyone. Client crisis resolved." Catherine's father entered the kitchen wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He'd skipped the costume requirement naturally. Frederick considered Halloween beneath his dignity, but he attended Richard's party every year because networking opportunities existed even at suburban social gatherings. "Gregory," he said, nodding in my direction. "Enjoying yourself?" "Always a pleasure, Frederick." His eyes swept the kitchen, taking inventory of the guests and their interactions with the calculating precision of a man who'd built his fortune reading people. Frederick noticed everything, forgot nothing, and used both observations to his advantage whenever possible. "Where's Catherine?" "I wanted to discuss the charity auction next week." Linda and I exchanged glances. "She's in the living room," I said. "Catching up with an old friend." Frederick's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh? Anyone I know?" "Jonathan Drake. They dated in high school." Something shifted in Frederick's expression, a subtle tightening around his eyes that suggested the name meant something to him. "Jonathan Drake. Yes, I remember him. Interesting young man." "Interesting how?" "Catherine was quite taken with him back then. Caused considerable drama when they broke up." Frederick accepted a beer from Linda and took a measured sip. "I was rather relieved when she started dating you instead. Jonathan was never what I'd call stable relationship material. And yet she's been talking to him for the past hour." Frederick's gaze sharpened. "Has she now?" Through the doorway, we could see Catherine and Jonathan still deep in conversation. She was laughing again, that bright, uninhibited sound that used to be reserved for our private moments. "Perhaps I should say hello," Frederick said, but he made no move toward the living room. Instead, he studied my face with the same intensity he probably used during cross-examinations. You look troubled, Gregory. Just tired. Long week at work. Yes, the restaurant business can be demanding, though I imagine it's nothing compared to the demands of marriage. The comment carried an undertone I couldn't quite decipher. Frederick had always been cryptic, speaking in layers that required careful interpretation. Tonight, however, his words felt more pointed than usual. Marriage requires constant attention, I agreed carefully. Indeed, neglect can be costly in many ways. Linda cleared her throat. I should check on the other guests. Excuse me? She left the kitchen, leaving Frederick and me alone with the uncomfortable silence that always settled between us. He'd never quite approved of my marriage to his daughter, though he'd been too polite to say so directly. Catherine was his only child, his pride and joy, and he'd wanted someone with more impressive credentials than a restaurant manager with a bachelor's degree from a state university. Gregory, may I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? The question caught me off guard. Frederick rarely inquired about personal matters, preferring to keep our interactions focused on safe topics like weather and sports. That's a complicated question. Most important questions are complicated, but the answers are usually simpler than we expect. I took a long drink of beer, buying time to formulate a response. I thought I was happy, but lately I'm not sure Catherine feels the same way. Frederick nodded slowly. Catherine has always been restless. Even as a child, she struggled with contentment, always wondering if something better waited around the corner. Something better than what she has now? Something different. Catherine confuses excitement with happiness, passion with love. It's a common mistake among people who've never experienced real hardship. You think she's looking for excitement? I think Catherine is 35 years old and wondering if she made the right choices. Unfortunately, she's chosen tonight to explore those doubts publicly. Through the doorway, Jonathan had moved closer to Catherine on the couch. His hand rested on the cushion behind her shoulders, not quite touching, but establishing clear territorial boundaries. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. What would you do? I asked. If you were in my position? Frederick considered the question while watching his daughter flirt with another man. I would remember that dignity is more valuable than desperation, and I would make sure my interests were protected, regardless of what Catherine decides to do. Protected how? You signed a prenuptial agreement, did you not? Yes, but then you understand that certain behaviors have consequences. Catherine may have forgotten that detail, but contracts have excellent memories. The implication hung in the air between us like smoke. Frederick wasn't just making conversation, he was providing guidance. Professional guidance from a man who understood exactly how legal documents could be weaponized when marriages failed. You think it's going to come to that? I think you should be prepared for any possibility. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. It served me well in both law and life. A crash from the living room interrupted our conversation, followed by raised voices and nervous laughter. Frederick and I hurried toward the commotion, where we found Jonathan on his feet, beer dripping from his shirt, while Catherine dabbed at the stain with a handful of napkins. Sorry about that, Jonathan was saying to Richard, who stood nearby with an empty bottle. Guess I got a little too animated with my story. No problem, Richard replied, but his eyes were fixed on Catherine's hands as she continued cleaning Jonathan's shirt with unnecessary thoroughness. Accidents happen. Catherine, perhaps you should let Jonathan handle that himself, Frederick suggested mildly. She looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten other people existed. Dad, I didn't hear you come in. I arrived a few minutes ago. You seemed occupied. Catherine stepped back from Jonathan, her cheeks flushing slightly. I was just catching up with an old friend. You remember Jonathan Drake, don't you? Indeed, I do. Frederick extended his hand to Jonathan with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. How are you, Jonathan? Still in construction? Yes, sir. Running my own crew now. Business is good. Excellent. Catherine was just telling me how much she's enjoyed reconnecting with you. Actually, Dad, I haven't mentioned. No need to explain, dear. Old friendships are precious things. Though I imagine Gregory might feel left out of your reunion. All eyes turned to me, and I realized I was expected to say something gracious about my wife's obvious infatuation with another man. The moment stretched uncomfortably, while everyone waited for me to play my assigned role as the understanding husband. Jonathan and I were just getting reacquainted ourselves, I said finally. It's been years since we've all been in the same room. High school seems like a lifetime ago, Jonathan agreed, but his eyes kept drifting back to Catherine. For some people, Frederick observed, others seem to find the past more compelling than the present. The comment landed like a small bomb in the middle of our circle. Catherine's face flushed deeper, Jonathan shifted uncomfortably, and Richard suddenly became very interested in cleaning up the spilled beer. Dad, that's not fair. Fair is a relative concept, Catherine. What matters is honesty. Honesty about what? Frederick's smile grew colder. About what we really want versus what we pretend to want. About the difference between fantasy and reality. About the consequences of our choices. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other guests were starting to notice our little drama, conversations quieting as people strained to overhear what was clearly becoming a family confrontation. Maybe we should take this somewhere private, I suggested. Why? Frederick asked. Are we discussing something that requires privacy? Catherine looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Jonathan appeared ready to bolt for the door. Richard hovered nearby, clearly torn between intervening and staying out of family business that didn't concern him. Frederick, I said carefully, perhaps this isn't the time or place. On the contrary, Gregory, I think this is exactly the time and place for clarity. He turned to face Catherine directly, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Catherine, you're a married woman. Your behavior tonight has been inappropriate and embarrassing. If you have something to say to your husband, say it. If you have something to say to Jonathan, say it. But stop playing games that make everyone uncomfortable. I'm not playing games? Then what would you call spending an entire evening ignoring your husband while flirting with another man? The words hit their target with surgical precision. Catherine's mouth opened and closed without sound, while Jonathan took a step backward as if trying to distance himself from the confrontation. That's not what I was doing, Catherine said weakly. Then enlighten us. What exactly were you doing? The living room had gone completely quiet now. Even the music seemed muted as our personal drama became the evening's main entertainment. I could feel dozens of eyes watching us, waiting to see how this particular soap opera would unfold. Catherine looked around the room, perhaps realizing for the first time how her behavior appeared to others. Her gaze moved from her father to Jonathan to me, and I saw something shift in her expression. The embarrassment was fading, replaced by something harder and more defiant. You want honesty, Dad? Fine. Here's your honesty. She turned to face me directly, her chin raised in challenge. Greg, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago. My stomach dropped. Catherine, maybe we should... No. Dad's right. It's time for clarity. She took a deep breath, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next was going to change everything. You were always my second choice, Greg. Jonathan was the one I really loved. The words hung in the air like poison gas, spreading through the room and contaminating everything they touched. I felt the collective intake of breath from our audience, the subtle shift as neighbors and friends processed what Catherine had just confessed. I didn't flinch. Somehow, hearing the truth spoken aloud felt less devastating than I'd expected. Maybe because part of me had always known. Maybe because the relief of finally understanding was stronger than the pain of confirmation. I see, I said quietly. Catherine seemed surprised by my calm response. She delivered her confession like a weapon, expecting it to wound, to provoke some dramatic reaction that would justify whatever came next. Instead, I just stood there, processing the information with the detached interest of someone reading a weather report. "That's all you have to say?" she demanded. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for 8 years. This woman who'd just admitted I was her consolation prize. She was beautiful and selfish and cruel, and I wondered how I'd managed to miss that combination for so long. "Then go back to him," I said simply. Catherine blinked, clearly expecting argument or pleading or some desperate attempt to win her back. When none came, she laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that carried more confusion than amusement. "Just like that? You're giving up? I'm giving you what you want, permission to be with your first choice." The laughter continued, but it was taking on a hysterical edge now. Catherine had planned this confrontation, but not this reaction. She'd expected me to fight for her, to beg her to reconsider, to prove my worth through some grand gesture of devotion. "You can't be serious," she said. "I'm completely serious." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the manila envelope I'd been carrying for 3 days, ever since Linda Fletcher had finished reviewing my options and preparing the necessary documents. Catherine's laughter died abruptly when she saw the envelope in my hands. "What is that?" Instead of answering her, I turned to Frederick. "I believe this concerns you as well." Frederick's eyes narrowed as he accepted the envelope. He opened it with the careful precision of a man who'd spent his career reading legal documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. "What are those?" Catherine asked, but her voice had lost its defiant edge. "Divorce papers," Frederick said without looking up. "Quite thorough ones, actually." "Divorce papers? Greg, you can't be serious. I was just being honest about my feelings. And I'm being honest about mine. I don't want to be married to someone who considers me her second choice." Frederick continued reading, his lawyer's mind automatically cataloging the implications of each clause and provision. When he reached the 3rd page, his eyebrows rose slightly. "Gregory, this is very well prepared. Who's representing you?" "Linda Fletcher." "Ah, Linda does excellent work." Frederick's tone carried a note of professional respect. "Catherine, you might want to review this carefully." "I don't understand. What's to review? If Greg wants a divorce, fine. We'll split everything 50-50 and move on." Frederick and I exchanged glances. He'd reached the section that mattered most, the clauses that would transform Catherine's casual confession into a financial catastrophe. "Actually, dear, it's not quite that simple." "What do you mean?" Frederick held up the document, his expression grave. "Do you remember the prenuptial agreement you signed before the wedding?" "Of course I remember. You made me sign it. Standard protection of assets, right?" "Standard protection, yes, but with specific provisions for certain circumstances." Catherine's confidence was starting to crack. "What kind of circumstances?" "Infidelity, for instance. The prenup contains very clear language about what happens to asset division in cases of adultery." "Adultery? I haven't committed adultery. I've never even—" She stopped mid-sentence, perhaps realizing where this conversation was heading. "Public confession of emotional infidelity might qualify," Frederick continued, "particularly when witnessed by multiple parties. And if physical infidelity can be established, there's been no physical infidelity. Yet," I said quietly. The word dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, creating ripples that spread outward to encompass everything we weren't saying. Catherine looked from me to her father to Jonathan, who had been standing frozen throughout this entire exchange. "This is ridiculous. You can't divorce me for being honest about my feelings." "Actually," Frederick said, "under the terms of the prenuptial agreement, emotional abandonment combined with public humiliation of the spouse can be grounds for fault-based divorce, which means what?" Frederick folded the papers and handed them back to me. "Which means you've just forfeited your claim to half the marital assets. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, all of it remains with Gregory under the infidelity provisions. The room was so quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Catherine stared at her father, as if he'd just spoken in a foreign language. That can't be right. You wouldn't have made me sign something that unfair. I made you sign something that protected both parties, assuming both parties honored their commitments. You've just publicly acknowledged that you haven't honored yours. But I never cheated. I never even... You just announced to a room full of witnesses that your husband was your second choice, and that you really love another man. In legal terms, that's abandonment of the marriage contract. Catherine turned to Jonathan, perhaps expecting him to ride to her rescue like some romantic hero. Instead, she found him backing toward the door with the expression of a man who'd just realized he'd wandered into a minefield. Jonathan, tell them this is crazy. Tell them we were just talking. Catherine, I think maybe I should go. This is between you and your family. Between me and my family? What about us? What about what we talked about? We talked about a lot of things. Old times, mostly. I never said anything about what? About us getting back together? About giving us another chance? Jonathan's face flushed red. Catherine, I'm married. I have kids. I thought you understood we were just catching up as friends. The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She'd built an entire fantasy around their conversation, reading romance into what Jonathan had apparently considered friendly nostalgia. But you said... I said it was nice to see you again. I said you looked good. I said I wondered sometimes how different things might have been if we'd stayed together in high school. That's not the same as saying I want to leave my wife. Catherine looked around the room desperately, searching for support or sympathy or some escape from the trap she'd built for herself. Instead, she found dozens of neighbors and friends watching her humiliation with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a car accident. This is insane, she said finally. Greg, you can't seriously want to divorce me over one stupid comment. It wasn't one comment, Catherine. It was 8 years of feeling like I wasn't enough. 8 years of wondering why you seemed so dissatisfied. 8 years of trying to measure up to some standard you never bothered to explain. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been telling me the truth before we got married. Fair would have been letting me decide whether I wanted to spend my life with someone who was settling for me. I wasn't settling. You just said I was your second choice. What would you call that? Catherine's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Around us, the party guests continued their silent observation of our domestic implosion, probably storing up details to share with friends who hadn't been lucky enough to witness it firsthand. Frederick, Catherine said, turning to her father with desperate eyes, you can't let this happen. You can't let him take everything because of one moment of honesty. Frederick's expression was colder than I'd ever seen it. Catherine, you've embarrassed yourself, your husband, and your family in front of half the neighborhood. You've publicly declared your love for another man, while your husband stood 10 feet away. You've treated your marriage like a joke, and your husband like a fool. Dad! I'm not finished. You've also demonstrated exactly the kind of poor judgment and selfishness that the prenuptial agreement was designed to address. I wrote those provisions to protect you from fortune hunters and to protect your inheritance from reckless decisions. I never imagined I'd be using them to protect a good man from my own daughter's cruelty. The words hit Catherine like slaps. She staggered backward, bumping into the coffee table and nearly losing her balance. You're taking his side? I'm taking the side of decency and responsibility. Two concepts you seem to have forgotten. This is unbelievable. My own father, your own father, is watching you destroy your life in real time and trying to minimize the damage, though I suspect it's too late for that. Frederick was right. The damage was done, and it was comprehensive. Catherine had humiliated herself and me in front of everyone we knew. She'd confessed to emotional infidelity with a man who'd just publicly rejected her. She'd triggered the prenup provisions that would cost her everything she'd taken for granted. "Jonathan," Catherine said, making one last desperate attempt. "Please, don't let them do this to me." Jonathan was already at the door, keys in hand. "Catherine, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought we were just talking about old times." "We were talking about more than that, and you know it." "No, we weren't. We were talking about high school and wondering what might have been. That's not the same as planning a future together. But the way you looked at me, the way I looked at an old friend who I was happy to see again, nothing more." With that, Jonathan was gone, leaving Catherine standing in the middle of Richard's living room like an actress who'd forgotten her lines. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "Well," Richard said finally, "this has been educational." A few people laughed nervously. Someone turned the music back up. Gradually, conversations resumed as the party guests tried to pretend they hadn't just witnessed the complete destruction of a marriage. "Catherine," I said quietly, "I'll be staying at Richard's tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss the logistics." "Greg, please, can't we talk about this privately? Can't we work something out?" "We just did work something out. You get what you wanted, freedom to pursue your first choice. I get what I deserve, freedom from someone who never really wanted me in the first place." "That's not true." "It's exactly true. You said so yourself." I handed the divorce papers back to Frederick. "I'll need those filed first thing Monday morning." "Of course. Linda's already prepared everything properly." "Dad, you can't let this happen," Catherine pleaded. Frederick looked at his daughter with an expression I'd never seen before, disappointment so profound it was almost pity. "Catherine, you did this to yourself, and you did it in the most public, humiliating way possible. I can't fix this, and frankly, I'm not sure I would if I could." "But he's taking everything. He's taking what the prenup says he can take when a spouse violates the marriage contract. You signed that document, Catherine. You agreed to those terms." "I didn't know." "You didn't bother to read it carefully. That's not the same thing." Catherine looked around the room one more time, perhaps hoping someone would come to her defense. Instead, she found only curious stares and whispered conversations. "This isn't over," she said finally. "Yes," I replied. "It is." The next morning arrived with the kind of gray October sky that makes everything look washed out and depressing. I sat in Richard's kitchen, drinking coffee that was too strong and reading text messages that were too numerous to answer. "Your phone's been buzzing for 2 hours, Richard observed, joining me at the table with his own mug. Word travels fast in suburbia. Apparently. The messages ranged from sympathetic to curious to gleefully gossipy. Half the neighborhood wanted to express their support. The other half wanted details they could share with friends who hadn't been at the party. I deleted most of them without responding. "Any word from Catherine?" 17 missed calls and about 30 text messages. I haven't read them. "Probably for the best. Give her time to cool down before you try to have a rational conversation." I looked at Richard over my coffee mug. "You think there's going to be a rational conversation?" "I think there's going to be a lot of irrational conversations before we get to a rational one." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Linda Fletcher. "I should take this," I told Richard. "Greg." Linda's voice was crisp and professional. "I've been getting calls since 7 this morning. Word about last night has spread quickly." "I imagine it has." "Frederick wants to meet this afternoon to discuss strategy. Can you be at my office at 2? "Strategy for what?" "Damage control mostly. Catherine's been calling around town trying to find an attorney who'll take her case. She's also been telling people that you blindsided her with divorce papers." "I blindsided her?" "She's the one who announced her love for another man in front of half the neighborhood." "I know that, and you know that. But Catherine's version of events is somewhat different. According to her, you've been planning this divorce for months, and used her innocent conversation with an old friend as an excuse to trigger the prenup. I set down my coffee mug harder than necessary. Innocent conversation? Her words, not mine. She's claiming emotional distress and saying the prenup is invalid because she signed it under duress. What kind of duress? The usual. Pressure from her father, fear of losing the wedding, lack of independent legal counsel. It's a standard challenge, though not usually successful. But possible? Anything's possible in family court. That's why Frederick wants to meet. He's concerned about protecting both your interests and his own. After ending the call, I sat staring at my phone while Richard puttered around the kitchen, giving me space to process the latest developments. She's fighting the prenup, I said finally. Of course she is. Catherine's never accepted consequences for anything in her life. Why start now? Because she confessed to emotional infidelity in front of 30 witnesses? Because she's desperate and embarrassed and probably getting advice from friends who don't understand the legal implications? Richard was right, as usual. Catherine had grown up wealthy and protected, insulated from the kind of consequences that shaped most people's decision-making. Her father had always fixed her problems, smoothed over her mistakes, made her difficulties disappear with money or influence or legal maneuvering. This could get ugly, I said. This is already ugly. The question is, how ugly you're willing to let it get. My phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Catherine herself. We need to talk. This is crazy and you know it. I showed the message to Richard, who read it and shook his head. She still doesn't get it. She thinks this is some kind of negotiation. Maybe I should talk to her. Try to explain. Explain what? That actions have consequences? That marriage means something? That you can't publicly humiliate your husband and expect him to pretend it didn't happen? Maybe she was just drunk. Maybe she didn't mean, Greg, stop. You're doing that thing you always do. What thing? Making excuses for her behavior. Finding ways to blame yourself instead of holding her accountable. Richard was right, but the habit was hard to break. I'd spent 8 years interpreting Catherine's moods, managing her emotions, smoothing over her social mistakes. The instinct to protect her from consequences was deeply ingrained. She's going to lose everything, I said. She already lost everything. Last night, when she chose to humiliate you instead of honoring her marriage. Another text arrived. Please call me. We can work this out. Then another. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. And another. You can't throw away 8 years over one stupid comment. She's not going to give up easily, I observed. Good. Let her fight. Let her spend money on lawyers and court fees and private investigators looking for loopholes that don't exist. Let her learn what it costs to break a contract with Frederick Vanderholt. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Richard went to answer it, returning a few minutes later with a grim expression. Catherine's here. She wants to talk to you. I don't think that's a good idea. Neither do I. But she's not leaving. She's sitting in her car in my driveway, and she says she'll wait as long as it takes. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Catherine's silver Mercedes parked behind Richard's truck. She was visible through the windshield, talking on her phone with animated gestures that suggested the conversation wasn't going well. Maybe I should just get it over with. Maybe you should call Linda first. It's just a conversation. Greg, yesterday it was just a party. Look how that turned out. But I was already heading for the door, driven by the same protective instinct that had gotten me into this mess in the first place. Catherine looked up as I approached her car, ending her phone call and rolling down the window. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I know. I got your messages. Then why didn't you call me back? Because we don't have anything to discuss, Catherine. You made your feelings clear last night. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. Which part didn't you mean? The part where I'm your second choice? Or the part where you really love Jonathan? Catherine's face crumpled. Both. Neither. I don't know. I was confused and emotional, and I said stupid things. You weren't confused about Jonathan. You spent the entire evening flirting with him. I was not flirting. Catherine, please. Don't make this worse by lying about what everyone saw. She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands on the steering wheel. When she looked up again, her eyes were red with tears. Okay, maybe I was flirting a little, but it didn't mean anything. It was just, I don't know, nostalgia, curiosity about what might have been. And that's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you understand that I made a mistake, a stupid, thoughtless mistake that I regret completely. You regret getting caught. I regret hurting you. I regret saying those things in public. I regret making you feel like you don't matter to me. But you don't regret the feelings themselves. Catherine was quiet again, and her silence was more honest than any words could have been. I thought so, I said. Greg, please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can figure out how to fix what's broken between us. What's broken is that you married me while wishing you'd married someone else. Counseling can't fix that. It can help us understand why I felt that way. It can help us build something better. Based on what? Based on you settling for your second choice? Based on me trying to become someone I'm not? Based on 8 years of marriage? Based on the life we've built together? Based on love? You love Jonathan. I thought I did. But he made it pretty clear last night that he's not interested. The words hit me like a physical blow. Catherine wasn't trying to save our marriage because she'd realized she loved me. She was trying to save it because her first choice had rejected her. So, I'm your fallback position. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Jonathan doesn't want you, so now you want to work things out with me. Greg, that's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been figuring out your feelings before you married me. Fair would have been letting me decide whether I wanted to be someone's consolation prize. Catherine was crying now, but I felt nothing except a cold, distant anger that seemed to be growing stronger instead of weaker. I can't change the past, she said. I can only try to fix the future. There is no future, not for us. Because of the prenup, because of money, because of trust, because of respect, because of the fact that you just admitted you're only here because Jonathan rejected you. That's not the only reason. It's reason enough. I turned to walk back to Richard's house, but Catherine called after me. Greg, wait. Please. Just think about this. Think about what you're throwing away. I stopped and looked back at her. I'm not throwing anything away, Catherine. You already did that. The prenup isn't fair. My lawyer says we can fight it. Your lawyer is going to take your money and lose your case. You don't know that. I know that you signed a legal document prepared by one of the best family law attorneys in the state. I know that you violated the terms of that document in front of 30 witnesses, and I know that your father wrote the infidelity clauses specifically to prevent what you did last night. Catherine's expression shifted from pleading to something harder. My father betrayed me. Your father protected both of us from exactly this situation. He took your side. He took the side of honoring contracts and keeping commitments. You should try it sometime. With that, I walked back to Richard's house, leaving Catherine sitting in her car with her tears and her regrets, and her lawyer who was going to take her money while losing her case. How did it go? Richard asked when I came back inside. About like you'd expect. She wants to work things out now that Jonathan's rejected her. Classy. She's going to fight the prenup. Let her fight. Frederick's been preparing for this possibility since the day she signed it. My phone rang. Linda Fletcher again. Greg, I just got off the phone with Catherine's attorney, David Morrison from Morrison and Associates. Good lawyer? Competent, but he's taking a case he can't win. Frederick's prenup is bulletproof. Catherine seems to think otherwise. Catherine's desperate. Desperate people make poor decisions. Speaking of which, did you talk to her this morning? Briefly, she wanted to reconcile. I hope you recorded the conversation. Why would I record it? Because anything she said about her motivations could be useful if she tries to claim the marriage was salvageable. If she admitted that she's only interested in reconciliation because Jonathan rejected her, that supports our position that the marriage was effectively over before you filed. I hadn't recorded anything, but I remembered every word of Catherine's admission that she was only there because her first choice wasn't available. She made it pretty clear that I'm her backup plan. Good. That's exactly what we need. Greg, I want you to document everything from here on out. Every conversation, every text message, every attempt at contact. If this goes to court, we want a complete record of her behavior. You really think it will go to court? I think Catherine's going to fight until she runs out of money or options. Frederick's prepared to let her do both. After ending the call, I sat in Richard's kitchen and tried to process the fact that my marriage was becoming a legal battlefield. 8 years of shared history, reduced to evidence and testimony and billable hours. You okay? Richard asked. I keep thinking I should feel worse about this. Why? Because my marriage is ending. Because the woman I loved for 8 years just admitted she never really wanted me. Because my life is falling apart. Your life isn't falling apart. Your life is finally getting honest. Richard was right, as usual. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood. Catherine had never really wanted me, but she'd married me anyway because I was safe and acceptable and approved by her father. I'd spent 8 years trying to be enough for someone who was always looking elsewhere. I should probably find my own place, I said. You can stay here as long as you need to. Thanks, but I think it's time to start figuring out what comes next. What came next, apparently, was a war. Catherine was going to fight the prenup, challenge the divorce, and try to salvage something from the wreckage of her poor choices. Frederick was going to defend the contract he'd written, and the son-in-law he'd apparently decided was worth protecting. And I was going to learn whether 8 years of being someone's second choice had prepared me for the battle ahead. Linda Fletcher's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house downtown, all hardwood floors and tall windows that made everything feel more civilized than it actually was. I arrived 15 minutes early for our meeting and spent the time reviewing the documentation she'd requested. Every text message, every voicemail, every attempt at contact Catherine had made since the party. Frederick arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He nodded to me with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested our relationship had shifted from reluctant family connection to attorney-client privilege. Gregory, how are you holding up? Better than expected, honestly. Good. Clarity often brings relief, even when the circumstances are unfortunate. Linda emerged from her office, gesturing for us to join her at the conference table, where she'd spread out what looked like enough paperwork to fill a small library. Gentlemen, we have developments. She handed each of us a copy of a legal document that was still warm from the printer. Catherine's attorney filed this morning. They're challenging the prenup on grounds of unconscionability and claiming that Gregory's filing constitutes abandonment of the marriage. I scanned the document, trying to make sense of the legal language. Abandonment? I'm not the one who declared love for someone else. Morrison's arguing that your immediate filing for divorce without attempting reconciliation demonstrates that the marriage was already over in your mind, which invalidates Catherine's statements as the proximate cause. Frederick adjusted his reading glasses and studied the filing with the focused attention of a surgeon examining X-rays. Interesting strategy. Completely wrong, but interesting. Wrong how? I asked. Because the prenup specifically addresses this scenario. Section 12, subsection 4, public declaration of romantic attachment to a third party constitutes immediate grounds for fault-based dissolution, regardless of subsequent remedial efforts. Linda nodded. I wrote that language specifically to prevent exactly what Morrison's trying to argue. Catherine's statements at the party triggered the fault provisions the moment she made them. Her subsequent desire for reconciliation is legally irrelevant. So, we're in good shape? We're in excellent shape, assuming Catherine doesn't have any surprises for us. What kind of surprises? Frederick and Linda exchanged glances, and I got the uncomfortable feeling that they'd discussed possibilities I hadn't considered. Catherine's been making calls, Frederick said carefully, trying to find witnesses who'll testify that your marriage was already troubled before the party. Troubled how? The usual claims. That you were distant, unaffectionate, emotionally unavailable, that she felt neglected and turned to Jonathan for emotional support. That's ridiculous. If anything, I was too attentive. I spent 8 years trying to figure out why she always seemed dissatisfied. We know that, Linda said. But Catherine's building a narrative that positions her as the victim of an unhappy marriage who made an understandable mistake. Understandable mistake? She publicly humiliated me. She's claiming she was emotionally distraught and spoke without thinking. Morrison's going to argue that her statements were the product of marital distress rather than genuine infidelity. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the fact that Catherine was rewriting history to make herself the injured party. Who's backing her up on this? That's where it gets interesting, Frederick said. She's been calling our mutual friends, asking them to remember conversations where you seemed unhappy or distant or critical of the marriage. And most of them have been calling me to ask what the hell she's talking about. That was some relief, at least. So she's not finding support? She's finding some, Linda admitted. Susie Morrison, no relation to Catherine's attorney, apparently remembers several conversations where Catherine expressed frustration with your marriage. I knew Susie Morrison. She was Catherine's closest friend, a woman who collected other people's drama like some people collected stamps. If Catherine had confided marital problems to anyone, it would have been Susie. What kind of frustrations? According to Susie's preliminary statement, Catherine felt that you were more interested in your work than your marriage, that you rarely initiated romantic gestures, that you seemed to take her for granted. That's interesting, considering she's the one who shot down most of my romantic gestures over the years. Can you document that? What do you mean? Linda leaned forward. Credit card statements showing restaurant reservations she canceled, travel bookings that were changed or abandoned, gift purchases that she returned or complained about, anything that demonstrates you were making efforts that she rejected. I thought about the anniversary dinner she'd skipped because of a last-minute yoga class, the weekend getaway she'd postponed 3 times before we finally canceled it altogether, the jewelry she'd exchanged because it wasn't her style, even though I'd bought it based on pieces she'd admired in store windows. I can probably find some examples. Good. We want to build a counter-narrative that shows you were actively trying to improve the marriage while she was emotionally withdrawing. Is that really necessary? I mean, she confessed to loving another man in front of 30 witnesses. Frederick removed his glasses and cleaned them with methodical precision. Gregory, family court isn't always about facts. It's about stories. Catherine's story is that she was trapped in an unhappy marriage with an inattentive husband and made a desperate cry for help that you used as an excuse to abandon her. And our story? Our story is that you spent 8 years trying to please a woman who was never really committed to the marriage and finally discovered why your efforts were failing. Which story is more compelling? Linda and Frederick exchanged another look. That depends on the judge, Linda said finally, and on how well we can document our version of events. The next 2 hours were spent building what Linda called our evidence file. Credit card statements, email correspondence, text message histories, social media posts, anything that could demonstrate the pattern of our marriage and the efforts I'd made to maintain it. The picture that emerged was depressingly familiar. I'd spent years planning romantic gestures that Catherine had found reasons to avoid. I'd suggested couples therapy that she'd deemed unnecessary. I'd tried to address problems that she'd insisted didn't exist. "This is actually quite helpful," Linda observed, reviewing a series of text messages from our last anniversary. "You suggested dinner at Chez Laurent, her favorite restaurant, and she countered with a suggestion to just stay home and order pizza. She said she was tired, and 3 hours later, she posted Instagram photos from a girls' night out at that new wine bar downtown. I'd forgotten about that. Catherine had been too tired for our anniversary dinner, but energetic enough to spend the evening drinking with friends and posting photos that showed her laughing and dancing until midnight. The social media evidence is particularly strong," Frederick noted. "Catherine documented her own priorities quite thoroughly." "What do you mean?" Linda pulled up Catherine's Instagram account on her laptop. "Look at the pattern over the past 2 years. Dozens of photos from girls' nights, yoga retreats, shopping trips with friends, but only 3 photos that include you, and in 2 of those, you're barely visible in the background." She said she didn't like couple photos, that they were cheesy. Yet here she is posting romantic sunset shots with captions about finding herself and discovering what really matters. The photos were like archaeological evidence of Catherine's emotional withdrawal. I could see the progression from dutiful wife to restless individual to someone actively cultivating an identity that didn't include me. "This is actually quite damaging to her case," Frederick observed. "She's created a public record of emotional distance from the marriage while you were apparently still trying to engage." "So, what happens next?" "Next, we prepare for Morrison's discovery requests. He's going to want financial records, personal correspondence, witness statements, anything that might support Catherine's version of events. And then we wait to see how far Catherine wants to push this. The prenup is solid, but challenging it will cost her significant legal fees. At some point, she'll have to decide whether her pride is worth the expense." As we wrapped up the meeting, Frederick pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Gregory, I want you to know that I'm proud of how you've handled this situation." "Proud?" "You could have made a scene at the party. You could have responded to Catherine's cruelty with cruelty of your own. Instead, you maintained your dignity and let her destroy herself. I didn't feel very dignified. Dignity isn't about how you feel. It's about how you behave when you're under pressure. Catherine failed that test spectacularly. You passed it. What happens to Catherine when this is over?" Frederick's expression grew sad. "Catherine will learn what the rest of us learned long ago, that actions have consequences. I've protected her from that lesson for too long. You don't think she'll recover from this? I think Catherine will have to decide what kind of person she wants to be. The kind who takes responsibility for her mistakes, or the kind who blames everyone else for the consequences of her choices." Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of everything that was happening. My marriage was ending, my wife was becoming my adversary, and my father-in-law was choosing sides in a battle that would determine my financial future. But underneath all of that, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the relief of finally understanding where I stood. Catherine had never really wanted me, and now I didn't have to pretend that was acceptable anymore. My phone buzzed with another text from Catherine. "Please don't do this. We can fix what's broken between us." For the first time since the party, I responded, "What's broken is that you married me while loving someone else. That's not something we can fix." Her reply came immediately. "I don't love Jonathan. I love you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "You love the security I provide. There's a difference." She didn't respond to that, and I didn't expect her to. The truth has a way of ending conversations that were never really honest to begin with. 3 weeks after the party, Catherine's legal challenges had collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. Morrison had withdrawn from the case after reviewing Frederick's documentation of the prenup negotiations and Catherine was now on her third attorney, a desperate move that suggested she was running out of both money and options. I was sitting in my new apartment, a two-bedroom place downtown that felt more like home after 3 weeks than the house in Maple Ridge had felt after 8 years, when Linda called with the news I'd been expecting. Catherine wants to settle. On what terms? Basically, she's accepting the prenup provisions as written. She gets her personal belongings, her car, and a small settlement that amounts to about 6 months of living expenses. That's it? That's what she agreed to when she signed the prenup. Frederick was very thorough in protecting both your assets and his own. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I felt tired. 3 weeks of legal maneuvering, thousands of dollars in attorney fees, and endless speculation from neighbors and friends, all to reach the conclusion that contracts mean what they say and actions have consequences. When do we finalize everything? Next week, assuming Catherine doesn't change her mind again, though I doubt she will. Her current attorney has been very clear about the futility of further challenges. After ending the call, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city lights that had become my new evening view. Somewhere across town, Catherine was probably having a very different conversation with her lawyer, learning that her attempt to rewrite history had failed completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Heard through the grapevine that Catherine's moving back in with Frederick. True? I typed back, news to me, but it makes sense. She doesn't have many options left. How do you feel about that? Relieved, mostly. At least I won't have to worry about running into her around town. It was true. Frederick lived in an exclusive neighborhood on the other side of the city, far from my usual haunts. Catherine's retreat to her childhood home felt like the final acknowledgement that her attempt at independent adulthood had failed. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was having coffee on my apartment balcony when the doorman called to announce that Frederick Vanderholt was downstairs asking to come up. Send him up, I said, wondering what could bring my former father-in-law to my new home. Frederick appeared at my door 5 minutes later, looking older than I'd seen him before. The past 3 weeks had taken a toll on him too, I realized. Watching your daughter destroy her life in public couldn't be easy, even when you were helping to enforce the consequences. Gregory, thank you for seeing me. Of course. Come in, can I offer you coffee? That would be nice. We sat on my balcony, 2 men who'd been thrown together by circumstances neither had chosen, drinking coffee and avoiding the obvious topic of conversation. Nice place, Frederick said finally. Good view. It suits me. Closer to work, easier to maintain. I should have made this move years ago. Perhaps, though I suspect you stayed in Maple Ridge for Catherine's sake. Among other reasons. Frederick nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. I'd made a lot of choices for Catherine's sake over the years, prioritizing her preferences over my own in ways that had become so automatic I'd stopped noticing them. I came to apologize, Frederick said. For what? For my daughter's behavior. For the position she put you in. For the fact that it took a public humiliation to reveal what I should have seen years ago. You couldn't have known. I could have known, and I should have known. Catherine's always been selfish, but I told myself it was just immaturity. I thought marriage would settle her, give her the stability she needed to grow up. It might have with someone else. No, Gregory, that's generous of you, but it's not true. Catherine married you because you were safe and acceptable and unlikely to challenge her when she behaved badly. She never intended to be the kind of wife you deserved. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Frederick was confirming what I'd suspected but never wanted to admit, that Catherine had chosen me precisely because I wouldn't demand too much from her. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to hear it from someone who loves Catherine but isn't blind to her faults. And because I want you to understand that her behavior reflects on her character, not yours. I spent 8 years thinking I wasn't enough for her. You were too much for her, too decent, too committed, too willing to work at the marriage. Catherine wanted the benefits of being married without the responsibility of being a wife. Frederick finished his coffee and set the mug down with careful precision. "There's something else I need to tell you." "What's that?" "Catherine's been in contact with Jonathan Drake." The words hit me like cold water. "Since the party?" "Since the day after the party. Apparently she's been trying to convince him that his rejection was based on misunderstanding her intentions." And Jonathan's wife found out about the calls. She's filed for divorce and taken their children to her mother's house in another state. I stared at Frederick, trying to process this information. Catherine's pursuit of her first choice had destroyed another marriage, ruined another family, caused pain that would ripple through multiple lives for years to come. Does Catherine know about Jonathan's divorce? She knows. In fact, she seems to view it as vindication of her feelings for him. And Jonathan? How does he feel about it? Frederick's expression grew grim. Jonathan blames Catherine for destroying his family. He's told her in very clear terms that he wants no further contact with her, ever. So she's lost everything: her marriage, her financial security, and the man she thought she wanted. Yes, and instead of accepting responsibility, she's convinced herself that everyone else is to blame. You, me, Jonathan, his wife, everyone except the person who made the choices that led to this situation. We sat in silence for a while, two men contemplating the wreckage that one woman's selfishness had created. Catherine hadn't just destroyed our marriage, she'd destroyed Jonathan's family and caused pain that would affect children who'd done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being related to adults who couldn't control their impulses. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, Catherine moves back home and tries to rebuild her life. I've made it clear that my support comes with conditions: therapy, accountability, and genuine effort to understand how her choices affected other people. Do you think she'll accept those conditions? I think Catherine will do whatever's necessary to maintain her lifestyle. Whether that translates to genuine change remains to be seen." Frederick stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Gregory, I hope you know that I consider you the son I never had. Catherine's poor choices don't change that." "Thank you, Frederick. That means more than you know." "You're going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. You're finally free to find someone who deserves what you have to offer." After Frederick left, I sat on my balcony and thought about the conversation. Catherine had lost everything: her marriage, her financial security, her first choice, and apparently her ability to learn from her mistakes. She'd created a disaster that had affected multiple families, and she was still looking for someone else to blame. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a message that made my stomach drop. "This is all your fault. If you'd been a better husband, none of this would have happened." Catherine had gotten a new phone number, apparently. I blocked the number immediately and made a mental note to inform Linda about the contact attempt. 20 minutes later, another text from another unknown number. "Jonathan's children are crying every night because of what you did to their family." I blocked that number too and called Linda. "Catherine's harassing me," I said when she answered. "What kind of harassment?" I read her the messages. Linda was quiet for a moment, then spoke in the crisp tone that meant she was shifting into legal mode. "Forward those to me immediately. This violates the no-contact provision in your separation agreement." "What can we do about it?" "We can file for a restraining order if she continues. We can also use this as evidence that she's not accepting the end of the marriage, which strengthens our position if she tries to challenge the settlement again." "Do you think she will?" "I think Catherine's going to keep fighting until she runs out of money or options. The question is how much damage she's willing to cause to herself and others in the process." That evening, I had dinner with Richard and his wife Nikki at their favorite restaurant downtown. It felt good to be out in public without worrying about running into Catherine or fielding questions about our marriage from well-meaning friends. You look better, Nikki observed over appetizers. More relaxed. I feel better. It's amazing what clarity can do for your peace of mind. Even with all the legal drama? The legal drama has an endpoint. Living with someone who resents you for not being someone else. That was never going to get better. Richard raised his glass. To new beginnings and lessons learned. To friends who tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it, I countered. We drank to that, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine optimism about the future. For the first time since college, I was living entirely for myself, making choices based on what I wanted rather than what someone else expected. Any thoughts about dating? Nikki asked. Eventually. But first, I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be enough for someone who's looking elsewhere. That's very wise, Richard said, though I have to ask, any regrets? I considered the question while watching other couples enjoy their evening out, people who presumably wanted to be with each other rather than wishing they were somewhere else. I regret wasting 8 years on someone who was never really available, but I don't regret learning what I learned about myself in the process, which is that I'm capable of more than I thought, that I don't have to accept being someone's second choice, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to stop pretending that unacceptable behavior is acceptable. My phone buzzed with another text from another unknown number. You destroyed everything good in my life. I showed it to Richard and Nikki, who read it with expressions of disgust. She's really not handling this well, Nikki observed. She's handling it exactly like someone who's never been held accountable for anything, Richard said. The question is how long Frederick's going to enable this behavior. Based on our conversation this morning, I think Frederick's patience is running thin too. I blocked the third number and made another note to send the message to Linda. Catherine was creating a documented pattern of harassment that would only strengthen my legal position if she decided to challenge the settlement again. You know what the ironic thing is? I said, as we waited for our entrees. Catherine got exactly what she said she wanted. She's free to pursue Jonathan, free from a marriage she never really wanted, free to make whatever choices she thinks will make her happy. And she's miserable, Nikki pointed out, because she never wanted freedom. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. She wanted the security of marriage and the excitement of an affair. She wanted me to provide stability while she explored other options. And when that didn't work out, she wanted you to take the blame for her choices. Exactly, but that's not my problem anymore. As we finished dinner, I realized that this was the first evening I'd spent in months without thinking about Catherine's moods, Catherine's needs, or Catherine's opinion of my choices. The relief was profound. Walking back to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my marriage, the sense that my life belonged to me. Catherine had taught me what I didn't want in a relationship. Now I had the opportunity to discover what I did want. My phone buzzed one more time with a message from Frederick. Catherine's agreed to enter therapy and stop contacting you. I apologize for her behavior and want you to know that it won't continue. I texted back, thank you. I hope therapy helps her find some peace. I hope you find some happiness. You've earned it. Standing on my balcony with the city spread out below me, I thought about Frederick's words. Happiness felt possible for the first time in years. Not the complicated, conditional happiness I'd tried to build with Catherine, but something simpler and more sustainable. The truth was, I'd been living someone else's life for 8 years, trying to be someone else's version of an ideal husband. Now I had the chance to discover who I actually was and what I actually wanted. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, but for the first time since I could remember, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than something to endure. I was reading the Sunday paper in my favorite coffee shop when I saw the engagement announcement. Jonathan Drake and his new girlfriend, a woman named Maria Santos, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. The photo showed a couple who looked genuinely happy together, and the article mentioned that Jonathan's divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. I felt nothing except mild curiosity about how Catherine would handle the news. According to Frederick, she'd completed her therapy program and was working as a yoga instructor at a studio across town. They rarely spoke, and when they did, the conversations were brief and focused on practical matters. Interesting reading? I looked up to find Linda Fletcher standing beside my table, coffee in hand and amusement in her eyes. Jonathan Drake's engaged again. I was just wondering if Catherine's seen this yet. I'm sure she has. Small town, big news, though I hear she's been dating someone herself. Really? A guy she met in therapy. Another divorce recovery story, apparently. Linda gestured to the empty chair across from me. Mind if I join you? Please. Linda settled into her seat and studied my face with the analytical expression that made her such an effective attorney. You look good, Greg. Happy. I feel good. It's amazing what happens when you stop trying to fix something that was never going to work. Any regrets about how everything played out? I considered the question while watching other customers enjoy their Sunday morning routines. 6 months ago, I'd been married to a woman who wished she'd married someone else. Today, I was single, financially secure, and genuinely optimistic about the future. I regret that it took so long to understand what was really happening, but I don't regret the outcome. Catherine's apparently telling people that the divorce was mutual, that you both realized you'd grown apart. Let her tell whatever story helps her sleep at night. The people who matter know the truth. Very mature of you. Very practical of me. Catherine's not my problem anymore. Linda smiled at that. You know, I've handled a lot of divorce cases over the years. Most of my clients spend months or years processing anger and resentment. You seem to have skipped that phase entirely. I think I processed those feelings during the 8 years I was married to her. By the time she confessed the truth at Richard's party, I was ready to hear it. And now? Now I'm focused on figuring out what comes next. What came next, as it turned out, was a life that belonged entirely to me. I'd been promoted to regional manager at work, a position that came with more responsibility and significantly better compensation. I'd started taking photography classes on weekends, rediscovering a hobby I'd abandoned when Catherine decided it was too time-consuming. I'd even begun dating again, though nothing serious yet. Any advice for someone starting over at 39? I asked Linda. Don't rush into anything. Take time to figure out who you are when you're not trying to please someone who can't be pleased. And trust your instincts. They're probably better than you think. My instincts told me something was wrong for years. I just chose to ignore them, because you wanted to believe that love could overcome fundamental incompatibility. It's a common mistake, and an understandable one. But not one I plan to repeat. Good. The right person will appreciate what you have to offer without requiring you to become someone else. After Linda left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, reading and people watching and enjoying the simple pleasure of a Sunday morning with no obligations except the ones I chose for myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Poker night at my place Thursday. You in? I typed back, absolutely. Should I bring anything? Just your wallet. I'm feeling lucky. You always feel lucky. You're rarely right. This time is different, I can sense it. I smiled and put my phone away. Some things never changed, and I was grateful for that. Richard's friendship had been one of the constants that helped me navigate the chaos of the past year. Having people in your life who tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, was worth more than all the diplomatic politeness in the world. Walking home through downtown streets that had become familiar and comfortable, I thought about the path that had brought me here. Catherine's confession at the Halloween party had felt like the end of the world at the time. Now, it felt like the beginning of a life that was authentically mine. I'd learned that being someone's second choice was worse than being alone. I'd learned that contracts matter, especially when they're written by lawyers who understand human nature. I'd learned that dignity was more valuable than desperation, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to stop pretending that unacceptable behavior is acceptable. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was capable of more than I'd thought. More independence, more self-respect, more clarity about what I wanted from life and relationships. My apartment building came into view, and I felt the familiar sense of satisfaction that came with having a space that was entirely my own. No compromises, no negotiations, no walking on eggshells around someone else's moods and expectations. The future stretched ahead like an open road, full of possibilities that didn't require anyone else's approval or permission. For the first time in years, I was excited to see where it would lead. Catherine had given me an unexpected gift when she confessed the truth at Richard's party. She'd freed me from a marriage that was never going to make either of us happy, and she'd forced me to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be enough for someone who was always looking elsewhere. It had taken 39 years, but I'd finally learned the difference between being loved and being settled for, and I'd learned that I deserved better than being anyone's second choice. The truth, as it turned out, really had set me free.